What's going on, everybody? It is Triple Crown 24 back today with a new installment of the Sports Card Psychology podcast. Thank you so much for all of your great feedback on the first few episodes. I've received it both in the comments section on YouTube as well as some private messages from various platforms that I'm on with a lot of great feedback, as well as continuing the conversation uh, off the platform, which is fantastic. I really do enjoy hearing your thoughts and really extending these topics. I think it's very healthy dialogue in the hobby, and it helps us create better understanding. Today, we're going to talk about a concept that I think is going to be a universally relatable subject, and maybe not even specifically for sports cards, although I think probably most of us have experienced this at one point or another in the hobby. And that is the concept of fear of missing out, or FOMO. And we'll refer to it largely as FOMO for the majority of this show. Fear is one of those very complex emotions, and it's probably more integral in driving consumer behavior than we give it credit for. I think it also has a very large presence within the hobby and the decisions that we make regarding buying and selling cards. When is the right time to buy? Am I going to miss out on the opportunity to buy low? And then conversely, am I going to miss out on the opportunity to sell high? And there are a lot of different instances that we could probably think of. My guest today is going to share his own experiences with FOMO, kind of talking about where this fear comes from in the hobby. Where did this all start, and how do we navigate it in our own hobby decisions? So my guest today, very well known presence on multiple platforms. You'll know him here on YouTube as ThoseBackPages. Eric, how are you doing, my friend?
Hello, friends. ThoseBackPages here. I hope you are all very well. I'm very happy to be on the show, JT. Thank you for having me on this fantastic subject.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and as someone who has preached about FOMO on their channel several times, even sometimes devoting whole episodes to FOMO, it is nice to have you on. It's something that I think is very difficult for us to talk about at times, where maybe we don't necessarily want to talk about it. So let's start off by defining FOMO. How would you define it in your own words?
Well, literally, it means fear of missing out, as you mentioned. But I think it's obviously by definition it means fear of missing out. But I think a lot of it has to do with us as collectors have a burning desire to be right. And what I mean by that, being correct, and no matter what it is, what aspect of collecting you're talking about, you want to be correct. So we as collectors tend to migrate to other collectors of the same things, no matter what it may be. So we tend to take the opinions of others, our peers, with, not necessarily a grain of salt, but depending on what they're into and what you're into, might be a good idea to if you have a friend that's talking, or you see, as we'll probably discuss later in social media circles and stuff, if you see people are buying X, whatever X may be, you see enough people start buying it, at least psychologically, even unintentionally, you're like, man, maybe I should buy that too, and I should probably try to buy that before the price gets too high. And that's the general root of the fear. Like, I think that's the base root of the fear of missing out. Like, you don't want to. Perfect example is, as of our recording right now, it was announced that, actually it wasn't even announced, it was publicly made available for sale. We're in the middle of January 2022, and up for sale, at least this morning, it might be sold out now, but was the 2021 Topps Chrome Update release, which is a Target exclusive since 2014. So you can only buy it there. And the suggested retail price, whereas initially it was 20, and I think last year went up in 2020, I think it went up to 35. Anyway, this year suggested retail price is $50. You get 10 packs now instead of 3, but everything else, the checklist isn't even out yet. Topps has not released the checklist. But that triggers a fear of missing out. Like, I saw a lot of people say, "Oh, $50 is too much. I'm not spending that." I've seen other people say, "Hey, I bought 6. Hey, I bought 10." And at least subliminally, that feeds into the, well, if this guy's buying 10, I don't want to miss out. I might order some. Whereas, for myself personally, I keep one box each year since it started in 2013. So I went ahead and ordered one box. But I can definitely see, depending on, I don't want to use the word status, but depending on the status of the person that is saying, "Hey, I bought 10, I bought 20," you're going to see a casual person say, "Wait, I don't want to miss out. Why are they buying so many?" That's fear of missing out. That's one aspect of it. What do you think about FOMO?
Pretty much along the same lines as what you've said, just in terms of consumer behavior. I think that we're pretty much approached with it daily. If you go to the grocery store, for example, and you see someone who might be wearing nicer clothes than you, or you pull up at home when you come home from work every day and your neighbor has a nicer car than you, or everyone has this new electronic device, the latest smartphone, whatever the case may be, there's this innate fear that we're experiencing some kind of social exclusion. And as human beings, we're naturally social creatures. Personally, I'm more of an introvert, but even I crave that social interaction. And it's a negative feeling when you feel like you are excluded. And the hobby is incredibly social. In fact, it's become even more social, I think, in the past few years with the rising interest once again in card shows, these in person events, and especially the trade nights as well, where they are kind of these almost like little card parties. And to feel like you're missing out on going to these little uh, group meetings or gatherings of any kind of sort makes you feel like maybe you're missing something from your hobby experience. So it doesn't always necessarily have to be some kind of assigned monetary value. It could be that you're missing out on a experience rather than a good or a service. Um, I think what you said about the Topps Chrome update example is a fantastic example, and uh, probably something that we've dealt with in cycles for many years now. I don't know if in the beginning it was necessarily when baseball cards were, well, sports cards in general were first introduced, if it was as much because they weren't necessarily seen as collectibles that would hold value. They were more so toys, or something to put in your bike spokes, something to set your drink on, something to,
Something that
uh,
came with your gum. Yeah.
yeah, the accessory to the gum. Uh, Maybe there was a bit of it back then, but it has certainly evolved now that there is a monetary value assigned to these pieces of cardboard. Where would you pinpoint kind of the origins of hobby FOMO? When did consumers who chose to spend money on the hobby really start to feel like they were going to miss out on things?
I would probably, if I had to pinpoint it to a specific card, is that what you mean?
A card, a period in time, anything like that.
Probably started with 84 Donruss Mattingly. I mean, one could argue it was the 81 Topps Joe Carbonneau, but I would say the 84 Donruss Mattingly and then cemented with the 86 Donruss Canseco. That was, at one point in 86, I believe that was $100 card raw, well, raw because it was no other, there was no grading back then. So, and it continued. I mean, 89 Griffey, 90 Leaf Thomas, et cetera, and to where we are now. and with peaks and valleys along the way, obviously.
In terms of the Conseco, because that would be along the lines of what my answer would be to that question. What do you think it was about the Conseco that gave people that FOMO? Is it more so the fact that it was this $100 card, so it was more of a status symbol? If you owned a Conseco, that's a cornerstone piece of your card collection. Or was it more so the speculative side of it, where people they thought it was $100 now, of course, but what will it be 10, 20, 30 years down the line?
Back then, definitely speculative. It was a piece of I have this, you don't, but it was I have this. It's going to be putting my kids through college in 20 years. That's the whole run up of the quote unquote junk wax era that I have this. I have three. Not me personally, but someone back then said, "Oh, I have 5 wax cases of '88 Topps baseball that I'm just gonna store away, and my kids will go to college with when I sell them." So that at least me personally, who having grown up in I was a teenager in the late '80s, and it was more of a this is going to be so much money in the future versus status, like more of a status symbol, if that makes any sense.
Oh, I totally agree. I think we see some parallels to that in today's hobby. Speaking of which, I mean, it's been several decades removed now from when we kind of said the origins of this happened. How do you think FOMO has changed over time? Do you think that it's more prevalent in today's hobby landscape than it was back then, maybe less? And why do you think that is?
I think it's more now. It's more shifted more to the status symbol, especially now, the last, since the whole new, I like to call the new era of collecting, the post pandemic era, and everything that's, you know, changed in that regard. It's more of a definitely cards are, I don't know if acceptable is the word, like socially acceptable. Card collecting is certainly more socially acceptable now than it was 10 years ago, and it has become more of a status symbol because there's a lot of with social media. There's a lot of Instagram, especially. There's a lot. Oh, look at my cards. I have this. This is mine. This is my gold LeBron refractor. You don't have this. This is mine, and I want the likes, and I want the comments, and I want the views. And you see that especially with the large influence, like the influencers, the celebrities even that are showing off cardboard, and especially with Pokemon, you see it, and it's become a social status pretty much. I mean, it's I have this, you don't, and then that leads to some FOMO. Like, um, there's another less popular acronym called POMO, which is I don't know if it's popular, but friends and I use it. It's called pissed off, missed out. Those are the people that are angry that price is what it is now, and they either didn't buy it or they sold it more so the case that they sold it too soon and it's worth more now. So they're angry that it's worth more now because you know a perfect example is the Trout update. Oh, I sold out when it was $50. Now it's worth that. That's crap type of attitude. But with social media and instant access almost with social media, like you can post, this is my pickup. I got this in the mail today, and it's out there immediately, if that makes sense.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of instant gratification with that. And I'm glad that you brought up the Trout US 175 as an example. That's definitely a card that we'll use as more of a case study here later in this conversation because I think it really nails home this specific point. It's almost like a modern day Conseco in some senses, in other senses
Yes.
not so much. Let's stay on the topic of social media. It's done a lot of great things for the hobby. There's no denying that. I mean, people are able to talk about the hobby and be connected with people from around the world, uh, much more so than they were even a decade ago, through platforms such as Twitter, Facebook. There's so many Facebook groups out there that are related to collecting, uh, and also like niche groups that go into it too, such as grading groups, team specific groups, rookie
Hmm.
groups. I've seen them
Yep.
all. You have Instagram where you can post pictures of your card. It's a image oriented platform, and I've seen a lot of people start doing live sales on Instagram or going live to show off grading submission reveals. So a lot of the hobby can be accessed through those social media platforms. One of the downsides that I see with this, and this is also something that I've experienced both personally and also have seen personally happen, not just through the hobby, although it does definitely happen with the hobby, going back to the idea of social exclusion, is that social media really serves as a highlight reel. We get to choose what content and what parts of ourselves, or in the context of the hobby, our collections reach that social platform. We get to choose what context it's taken in as well, uh, through our own control. Do you think that this highlight reel mentality really paints an inaccurate picture of how the hobby works? And do you think that it leads to some ultimately poor hobby decisions that are influenced by some of these posts on social media?
Absolutely. That is. I agree with that. Not 100% in one way or the other, but it definitely can see it leading. I can see it to people making bad decisions. Um, I like how you said people. It's the highlights of one's life or whatever they choose to be on that particular platform. I think this is particularly true to the the box. I'm gonna call it the wax community. You know, for the younger listeners, that's the packs of cards, the boxes. Us old heads call them wax boxes, but you know, people that primarily showing off wax box like results. Like they'll open a case and oh, here's all my case hits, or they'll open like, oh man, I just bought this blaster at Walmart, and here's what I got. You know, check out this super rare colored parallel of whoever it may be hot at the time. What they're not mentioning is that, well, I opened 15 other blasters and they all sucked. Here's my one good one, or my one good hobby box, not the other 10 that I opened that sucked. So someone who might suffer from FOMO sees, oh wow, they bought a blaster for $100 and they got this $5,000 card. I'm gonna go buy a couple just because I might get that lucky. And it's really not the case. And again, I guess I'm more of less of a level of that degree, like the social media posts, highlights of your life, your hobby life, whatever aspect you choose to represent. You know, you show off a slab of an expensive car. It's like, oh, here's my, here's my. Well, all right, we'll go back to the US 175. So someone's, hey, I'm new, new to the gram, Instagram, new to the gram. Here's my Trout PSA 10. I love it. It's great. I love it. And then they post it, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's awesome! Great, that's awesome! I should grab one now. It's awesome." But they don't mention that they bought it 10 years ago for $50. Not even 8 years ago, that card was $50 and a 10. So not that the not that the poster is lying, but you know, the context of it all. Like, I think a lot of new people that are coming and I guess new is subjective as well. But people that are coming into the current state of the hobby in the new era, the last 18 months, things have changed. So you see these people with these collections. All right, I'll use myself for example. I've been collecting slabs for 17 years now. I have, I have great ones. I have Ike Davis, and everything in between. It's from collecting. It's a, as I always like to say, it's a marathon and not a sprint. So while I like to try, at least on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. ThoseBackPages. I like to try to show off one collectible item a day from my collection, and I happen to have various different hobby interests, not just cards. And I'll post something, and oh, that's awesome! That's so awesome! I can't believe you have that. And excuse me. And I, they don't realize that I've had this for a very long time. So they might want to rush out and buy one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I know watching your channel, you do show off a lot of your cards that you're proud of course. The ones that come to mind being the Mantle rookie, the LeBron Topps Chrome, those types of cards. And people see those and they don't necessarily get the context unless you're telling this story. That's, I guess, one of the more beneficial things about YouTube is that you can tell the story. But Instagram is a little tougher because people, at least just my experience, is that people will mindlessly scroll and they'll look at the images. They don't necessarily read what the caption is, especially if it's more than a sentence, if it's not just some kind of witty comment. On Twitter, you're limited to a certain number of characters, and people in general, we're lazy when we interact with social media. Typically,
Yes.
we don't like to read things. YouTube might be a little bit different because in the audio video format, it might be a little bit easier to kind of tell the stories behind it. But oftentimes, we kind of assume that people have heard the stories enough, and people who may be new to the content, who haven't gone back to it, don't necessarily revisit it and understand, well, I bought this back in a time when it was only $50 in the example of the Trout rookie. And I think that card has really been the epitome of FOMO. And it's going on, I mean, it's over a decade old now. My
Yeah.
personal story with the Trout is that I had probably about a dozen of them at one point in time, and the most I ever sold one for was for $50 back in 2015. Um, and I did find out that that one eventually was graded out to BGS True Gem
Ah,
95. And does it sting a little bit? Of course it does. I mean, I don't like to think that I ever make a selling decision where I'm going to miss out on thousands of dollars, quite literally in this case. But when I was getting $20 to $25 each for them, I thought, this is crazy. This is just a base card. In my eyes, this was back during the era when I think hits had a lot more importance out of the boxes than maybe just the base rookie cards did. And
right.
I didn't really care. I mean, I thought $25 for a base card, sure, I'll take that any day of the week. Not knowing what it would eventually become in the future. And I know that my story is not alone. I know of people who maybe had theirs thrown out when they went to college or something, or they had it. It's almost very similar to some of those stories you hear about 50s baseball cards. You have people who have entered the hobby since the real explosion of that card, past the we'll say the comic card mark at $1,000 for a PSA 10 example of the card. And it's kind of become a holy grail card for a lot of collectors just because of what the value is now. How do you think that the Trout rookie card has kind of influenced FOMO in the hobby? Because it's one of those that a lot of people have claimed that they have now officially missed out on because it is outside of their range.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there's just it. One could argue that that particular card ushered in where we're at now. I mean, you could argue that because of the US 175, base cards are popular again. Because as you mentioned, when you were moving the ones you had, it was like it's all right. This is just a base card. There's no numbering. There's no shine. There's no autograph. There's no memorabilia. There's no fabric or anything on it. So why would anyone want this? And that was 10 years ago. That was 8 years ago. Even that was a very popular um, frame of mind that a lot of people shared. And then slowly but surely, it's $50. It's $100. It's $150. It's $250. It's 300, et cetera, et cetera. And then it gets up to where it is now, where it's not really affordable for the average collector anymore. And there was definitely some FOMO on the rise up. And actually, one could even argue that now there is backlash because they claim there's so many of them. Why is this going for this? Because there's so many of them. But it is what it is in that regard as far as pricing goes. But that is the perfect card. I mean, because like you said, it's the I word. It's very iconic. It's instantly recognizable. Maybe not the phrase US 175, but you say Trout's, a Trout update, and people know what it looks like. It's comes right to mind like you know Upper Deck Griffey, Donruss Canseco, Donruss Mattingly. All these things come. The images of these cards come right to your head when they're mentioned. They're not, the McGuire 85 tops rookie stuff like that. These are I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna say it, iconic cards that they're just staples of at least of a baseball rookie card collection, in my opinion.
I want to touch on the wax that is associated with 2011 updates. So for the longest time, it kind of fell in line with what a Trout PSA 10 was going for in relation to how likely you were to pull the Trout out of a pack. Like, for example, when it was $2,500, a rack pack, you have about 1 in 10 chance of pulling any specific base card based on the set size and how many cards in the rack pack are allocated towards inserts or maybe a memorabilia card or something of the sorts. Um, so that would make sense because it was about $250 for a rack pack at that time, and PSA 10 Trout 2,500, so 1 in 10 chance to get a Trout. And then of course you'd have to grade it and everything. Whereas now the scarcity of 2011 wax, there's just not enough of it out there where it is readily available. And at this point, it's the wax itself has become a collectible. You don't really open it expecting to get your value back, or even if you pull a Trout, I don't even think you could pull a gold parallel at this point to make it worth your money. You would need to pull the diamond anniversary. You would need to pull
Right.
a black, a hope diamond, and
Right.
what you would need to pull, the criteria is going to increase as your format goes up. So if you're opening a rack pack, it will change. If you go to a hobby pack, then a hobby box, then a jumbo box, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we've seen this trickle down more so to some of the wax now. I remember that 2017 football wax really started to explode following the 2018 MVP season from Patrick Mahomes, where the cheapest hobby box of even like Panini football, just the bland Panini brand, was about $400
Hmm.
just because Mahomes was in it. And
Right.
now you see the prices are even more extreme with that with this year's rookie classes for baseball, basketball, and football. And arguably, these classes, especially in baseball, I think that's a pretty common opinion that they're nowhere near as good as they have been in the recent years. We've been kind of spoiled with some of the talent to come out in recent years.
Yes.
Even to some extent in basketball and football. Do you think that the prospects that are coming out in these sports, I mean, there are some very highly touted names. You have your LaMelo Balls, you have your Anthony Edwards, you have Mac Jones, you have um, in previous years you have Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow. If we want to go back to 2020, are these guys just really that good, and people really believe in them that much, or are we thinking back to the days of Trout and Mahomes and really searching for the next versions of them instead?
100% looking for the next versions of them. I mean, it's sticking to baseball. Every prospect that comes around, oh, he's the next Trout. He's the next Trout. He's the next Trout. So people hear that, and then they realize, oh man, I missed out on the Trout rookie. I'm not going to miss out on this, and that feeds into the FOMO. Whereas the odds of the current hot prospect, whoever it may be, actually living up to that hype is not probable for sure, and it's not realistic either. But it is what it is, and it's not something that's going to slow down. I mean, and the wax is a perfect example. I mean, the wax coming out now is priced immediately as if these guys are going to be the next superstars, and that's not slowing down. Especially the hobby boxes, they're coming out at I think when Prism football from this past year actually does come out now. I'm hearing the end of March for the season that ended this week, but it's priced at it's probably going to be $1,000 a box, and so you're already priced in that Mac Jones and Trevor Lawrence are going to be the next Mahomes, and like I just said, in reality, that's not likely. But the price is what the price is, and that'll that whole topic is obviously something for another podcast, obviously, but the FOMO feeds into that too.
Definitely will be doing a show on wax prices. Probably can get a lot of mileage in terms of number of shows
Oh yes.
out of wax. It just specifically within the last couple of years. Um, as someone who is a wax collector, when you mentioned at the start of the show, your Topps Chrome update run, you have one box from every year. Generally speaking, when we look at your collection, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on this, is that there's not too much that you've missed out on from a perspective of a passerby. You have a lot of great cards. You have a Jordan rookie. You have a Mantle rookie. You have several Brady's. Any card that you could think of that's like a key rookie, because that is your specialty is rookie cards. A lot of times of Hall of Famers or superstar players in graded form. You've had them. But I'm sure that if we peel back the curtain a bit, there are examples of when you've had FOMO yourself or you have actually missed out on something. Do you have any stories that come to mind immediately when I ask that?
Hmm. I did, but I just lost it. Let me think for a second. Um. Well, I had to do some catching up.
Right.
Now, you
While
know.
you think about it, I'll tell one of my stories, and
Okay.
you may get a chuckle out of it because you were right. Just gonna go ahead and put that out there. You were right. You usually are, and this one is probably one of my biggest regrets. Back in, I want to say this was summer of 2019 or early 2020, there was a 2012 gold prism of Miguel Cabrera in a PSA 10 holder that was listed on eBay. I believe it sold either at auction or a buy it now. I cannot remember right now, and I probably don't want to remember because of what is about to come out. Uh, but it was right around $100. And
Mhm.
for an unlicensed, in terms of team licensing, it is player license, like card out of 10. I knew of 2012 gold prisms, and I knew how huge they were in basketball and how they're growing even more so in football. And now even the baseball, I've been watching a few lately that have been taking off. Uh, I still didn't quite put the value on it where I was willing to spend $100, and I didn't really have $100 at the time to really just go out for a card. And it was one that I felt like I probably won't see this again, but I'll take my chances on it. And sure enough, I have not seen one again. And sure enough, I don't really think I want to know what the asking price would be if it did go up. And if it was at auction, I really don't want to think about what number I would have to put
Oh
into
boy, yeah.
eBay to make that card mine. So that's one of my personal experiences with it. Um, have you thought of your any of your stories that you might have had?
Well, I mean, basing it to rookies, for many years I passed on the Brady Bowman Chrome rookie, the Topps Chrome Aaron Rodgers rookie, which for myself I try to collect non-tens just to save the hobby money. And I was for many months, maybe even a year or so, I tried to find an Aaron Rodgers 2005 Topps Chrome rookie in the nine centered, and it never came to fruition. And I finally, this past summer at the show last year, I finally folded and paid up for one. I had to have one in my collection, and it was well over 10 times what I would have paid for it 10 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes you get stubborn and you resist the fear of missing out, and it doesn't always work out. Obviously, there are many examples that I could probably, if I thought hard enough, could think, well, I bought this and I shouldn't have. But again, that's one of the aspects of collecting. Not not everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows. Not everything is going to be home run. But at the end of the day, it is all part of your collection. So there's no harm in having recently retired Cameron Maben collection, which I have a significant amount of his cards. So I thought he was going to be better than he turned out being. I mean, but that again, that's more of a normal thing than not. I mean, you do this long enough, like those of you listening that are old timers like myself, Todd Van Poppel, Brian Taylor, uh, et cetera, et cetera. Those are even Greg Jeffries. These are at this point these are punchlines. Oh, you're buying this player. Oh, he might be the next Greg Jeffries. Ah, ha, ha, you fool. Again, they're not all going to be winners, but you have to enjoy yourself along the way.
And we've chuckled here a little bit when you mentioned Cameron Maben and Ike Davis. I'm sure most people probably didn't expect to hear those names today, but
No,
here we are. And we mentioned those names and we laugh about it, but that's really all you can do. And I think that's a healthy coping strategy when you face fear or anxiety over missing out, because it's a real feeling, and it's a negative emotion, and you have to confront it in some way. Otherwise, it usually will resurface. And those are examples of something where you did go after it and it didn't work out as you expected. How would you cope with something where, say, there was a card that maybe got away? Like my example of the Cabrera Prism. How would you manage kind of your negative emotion towards having missed out and having realized that fear of something that you actually didn't obtain?
well, there's two ways to go about that. Either you march on and look for something else, knowing that, all right, I missed that, but there's so many other things I want. Or you turn around and look at what you already have. That's one of the, I always say that we as collectors have an issue looking back at what we've already obtained and appreciating what we've already obtained. And that's part of the reason why on Twitter I do the collectible a day to, hey, I have this and I've had it X amount, whatever time, how long you had it doesn't matter. But it is part of your collection and something you have. So you should be important. You should be proud of what you have and what you've accomplished.
I'm glad that you said that. I think that's so true. And apologies for anyone who can hear the sirens going off in the background. My office happens to be right by
Oh,
the police and fire station, which is convenient in case anything were to ever go wrong. Uh, but back on topic here, that is so entirely true. Just being appreciative and well, not just appreciative, but also proud of what you have. Pride
yes,
is a tricky feeling and emotion, but when you've built up a collection and you put the time into it, and not necessarily you're a seasoned collector, you've put a lot of time into it and a lot of thought into it. But even if you're just starting out, I actually saw a video pop up in my recommended feed on YouTube earlier today about someone who was showing off their collection after 1 year. And I was interested in it just based on the title. And I was watching it. And did they have a bunch of comma cards that were high grades, low pops? No, but they had a collection they had built that they were proud of, and they had something to show for it, and they were proud of what they had shown off. And I think that is huge in really being able to enjoy the hobby and confronting those anxious thoughts or those fearful thoughts. Because I really do believe that with social media, I know that I've experienced it before where sometimes we can feel inadequate if our
oh
collections are
yes,
lacking in a certain way. Like, for example, if you show off um, your mantle rookie, and I'm also tackling post war rookie from that are in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I don't have a mantle. I'm like, dang, I can't afford that card. I wish I had one of those. My collection's not as good. Where it's not a competition. You have to build the best collection that you possibly can, and yeah,
yes.
that one might be expensive, but if you save up, I mean, there's always that possibility. So as we kind of wrap up the show today, you gave a lot of great advice there in kind of our last segment, but definitely want people to kind of take away from this. How do you navigate that FOMO? Because if you haven't experienced it already in the hobby, and you being the listener who's listening to this right now, or even if you have, very likely it will confront you again. And it will probably happen sometime this year if it hasn't already happened already. How do we accept that this is something that we experience in the hobby, and how do we navigate it to make it so it doesn't hinder our hobby experience?
Well, we definitely have to accept it because it's human nature. It happens to everyone. Doesn't matter what level you're at as far as collecting goes. And the best way to navigate it, at least for me personally, is to short answers to have many interests. You can shift focus from this to that, either players or different hobbies altogether, to keep things rotated, to always have something to seek out, because there's not going to be anyone that has everything. There's always going to, I don't care where you are on the collecting ladder, what level you are, you're always going to want something else, something more, something different, like acquire some more. Again, no matter what your hobby budget is or where you're at as a collector, you're going to want more. So there's always something. And I think another aspect of fighting the FOMO is having a circle of friends to discuss things with, bounce ideas off of. This is, that is one of the positive aspects of the social media aspect of the hobby now, is that, there's no need to collect on your own, a lone wolf type of scenario where you're just collecting. You can share your stuff, you can share your knowledge, you can gain friends, you can gain knowledge from those friends. You can discuss, like, hey, I missed out on this card, I'm really pissed. and speak out on it, especially a lot of collectors, at least in person, don't have like family members that give a crap about cards. So you can talk to your card, I'm doing air quotes, your card friends about it. And that will help fight off the FOMO. It'll maybe not fight it off, but help it pass.
I'm really glad that you said that as well. Definitely, if you talk to a spouse, a sibling, a parent, probably they don't understand unless they're collectors themselves what it
Right,
feels like to miss out or to have this fear. But your fellow hobbyists definitely can relate to it. And I think that helps to kind of break down this illusion that we mentioned earlier with the highlight reel of social media. When people share these very real feelings where it isn't all just sunshine and rainbows and, oh, these are all my best cards and I've never opened a box of $400 cards that ended up giving me $10 worth back in return. My I sent this card in to be graded. I thought it was a 9 and it came back a 2. Like those types
right,
of experiences where we have these negative emotions. Um, of course, you don't want to constantly carry yourself in a negative light because that can be
right,
a put off, and it's just not healthy too. But I think it makes you more relatable. It makes you more human, and people I know speaking personally, I highly respect anyone who will put themselves out there and make themselves vulnerable and share those feelings because these are the constructive conversations that not only can help ourselves and be therapeutic for ourselves, but it may also help someone else. And it may not be someone who even engages in the post. I've seen posts on Twitter before that really resonated with me, and I did not interact with them at all. It was just from
right,
scroll. So you never really know who is actually interacting with it in a sense that they're seeing it and thinking about it in their head. It may not be something that you can trace electronically, but it did have a profound impact on someone. So I think that's a good place to wrap up today's show. Eric, I really do appreciate you taking the time to come talk to me today and talk to everyone else about it. If you would, let everyone know where they can find you at.
well, it was absolutely my pleasure. I'm always down for good conversation. You can find me on YouTube at those back pages, on Twitter at those back pages as well. Those are pretty much the two. Well, there's a blowout message board. I'm on there as well, but those back pages, you're getting the gist of it. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Always glad to help any way I can.
And I want to thank you, the listener, for tuning into our episode today. If you're watching on the YouTube side of things, would love to hear your feedback in the comments below about maybe some of your own personal stories with FOMO or what you kind of took away from today's podcast and how you may navigate the hobby a little bit differently. Of course, if you are interested in picking up any cards from the eBay store, that is linked in the description of the YouTube video down below and also in the show notes for the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you may be listening. We have over 35,000 singles. Hopefully, you won't miss out on some of the great deals that I have. And if you do, don't worry, there will be more in the future. Always got to do some kind of cheesy tie in there at the end. But thank you so much for listening. We'll be sure to see you next Thursday with a new episode of Sports Card Psychology. Until then, take care, stay safe, and as always, be kind.